I have the pleasure of being here with Dean of Admissions at George Washington Law, Mr. Matthew Dillard. Thank you for joining us tonight. And I would love to give you a moment to introduce yourself. So take it away.
Thanks, Ayaka. So my name is Matthew Dillard. I'm the Director of Admissions at GW Law. I work with a team that includes our Dean of Admissions, Sophia Sim, and an Associate Director and a few others on a fantastic team of folks who are here to welcome you to GW Law. I'm going to be delighted to answer Ayaka's questions this evening, just to answer really anything that may be on your mind as a prospective student. One thing that I do want to tell you right off the bat is that if there are follow-up questions that you have after our conversation this evening, we are always here for you at GW Law. Our doors are open, figuratively and literally, so please be in touch with us. We're easy to find at law.gwu.edu. And so anytime you have a question, let us know. I just don't want you to think this is your only opportunity to hear from us during your time experiencing the admissions process. For those of you who do not know, GW Law is located right in the heart of Washington, D.C. We are about 4 blocks west of the White House and a few blocks north of the Lincoln Memorial. So if you have actually been to Washington, D.C., then no doubt you've been in some of the public sort of famous parts of town, like the National Mall. Perhaps you've walked by the White House. And if you've done that, you've actually been very close to George Washington University Law School. And of course, being in the heart of a world legal capital is amazing, I think, for law students. So that's a big draw for students who want to come to GW Law. And I'm sure we'll talk about that some during our conversation. But that's me. I'm eager to hear Ayaka's questions, and we'll get started on our conversation. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I may say, following up with admissions and kind of emailing directly, you can get more of your questions answered. I always find that listening to these podcasts, kind of being in the interview as well, I always have follow-up questions. So highly recommend. So thank you for opening that door for everyone. I would love to kick us off tonight with, you described where the campus is, and clearly in DC, in a place where there's politics and government and governance is done. What kind of student is the right fit for GW Law? Do we need to be politically minded? Do we need to be public service oriented? What's the right fit there?
That's a great question. And it's not the first time I've heard that question. When you say need to be, the answer to that is no. I think sometimes people think if I'm going to come to a law school that's in Washington, D.C., I must need to be like a political junkie who's watching, cable television all the time and reading the New York Times, all day long and really following politics, or I must be a public service person because DC, of course, is a very public interest oriented city, right? Obviously, if you are interested in the realm of politics or anything related to public interest law, as many of our students are, then I'm going to admit it's hard to beat being in the heart of Washington, D.C. for law school. Mm-hmm. But I don't want people to think that that's the only reason to come to Washington or GW Law for law school. In part because our curriculum is huge. It's one of the largest elective curriculums among U.S. law schools. And so there is so much to dive into that, in fact, a lot of our students come to us because they have an interest in business and finance, which is one of our largest, course tracks. Maybe they have an interest in, elements of law that relate to intellectual property or relate to, things that are not related to the sphere of politics or public interest work. Of course, if you are interested in that, then it's a good place to be. But generally speaking, if I had to just generalize about what student is going to fit in well at GW Law, I would say that it's a student who wants to be busy. Mm-hmm. You are in the heart of a dynamic international city that, as I mentioned, is a huge legal capital. You are in a bustling law school community. Our Student Bar Association, which kind of is a governing group for all of our student organizations, has actually been recognized by the American Bar Association several times because of the busyness of our student body. People are not just, I mean, look, academics is important. I don't want to downplay that. But people do not come to GW Law just to stick their nose in a book for 3 years and never look up. That may be the right way for some people to do law school. You know, there's nothing wrong with going to a quieter location, perhaps a smaller, law school, if that is the right fit for someone. But for us, the right fit is typically people who are very engaged with the world around them in whatever way they see fit or whatever way activates them, and who wants to be busy with a combination of academics, internships and field placement, busy with student life in student organizations, and also there to be busy with friends. People come to GW Law and often make some of the best friends of their life. I've known a number of students who have married their fellow GW Law students after graduation.
Wow.
So that is something that is, you are here to have a robust 3 years. Mm-hmm. So if your goal is to be energized by your community and to be kind of, if you're one of those people who does well when they're doing a lot of things, I think GW Law may very well be a good fit for you.
Amazing. And there's so many things that I'm like, I want to double click into all these things. And we will touch in shortly on like the clinics and research institutes and all that. So just continuing with applying to law school. And I would love to dive a little bit deeper in there. For you, when you look at a student who is a prospective student who is looking to apply and you have their application in front of you, what is your process of looking at their application? Do you look at their GPA first, their personal statement first? What does that process look like for you?
I'll be honest, our process is pretty straightforward. There's nothing about it that I think would surprise applicants. Not like if you peek back behind the curtain of what's happening in the GW Law admissions process, that there's some mysterious, secret going on with the Wizard of Oz. That's not how it works. Human beings will be reading your application. So that is one thing. I think sometimes people are so focused on applying through computer screens and reading message boards and sort of diving into ways to find information that don't involve the actual people who are making decisions. And I will recommend getting to know us because we are the people who will be reading your application. But essentially, applications are read from beginning to end. Applications come in 2 component parts, typically. The CAS report, which is sent to all the law schools to which you apply. That includes information about your LSAT history, your academic performance as an undergraduate, all of your transcripts, letters of recommendations are all packaged by LSAC. And then we have our application itself, through which we require that you do things like submit a free topic personal statement, submit your resume. You can also submit an optional statement if you wish. But that's where we actually get to know the applicant. And so that we're probably spending more time, frankly, on the second part of that application, because that's where we want to get to know who we may be inviting to join us as a member of the GW Law community. But essentially, every application is reviewed thoroughly by a member of our admissions team, one of the directors or the dean, and then we make recommendations for admission or to waitlist the applicant, or perhaps to deny them if they're not strong enough. And then that is reviewed kind of a second time in the process to make sure that the dean of admissions agrees with that, decision that was made by the original reader. And then typically a decision goes out. We try to be very thorough, but also as expeditious as possible. One thing I will say is that, there are different ways to apply to GW Law. So make sure you read our website carefully, because there's a couple of binding programs that are quite different from one another. But for those who apply through the regular decision process, which will be the vast majority of applicants, there is nothing special that they need to do for scholarship consideration. Anybody who's admitted through the regular process is automatically considered. So that becomes sort of a second phase of the review process that happens just after the point of admission. And I know that's important to some applicants to know how that would work. There's nothing special that an applicant would need to do if they are a regular candidate for admission. If you want to apply through a binding process, let us know because you may have specific questions about those programs.
Great. And since you mentioned these binding, admission processes, before applying, should an applicant reach out to admissions to talk about that program and how to apply or how to be a better applicant for that program? Or, do you see people just kind of send in their application through for that binding process?
Many people might just send their applications in because they've done their own research, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with reaching out to us. I really look at binding programs as the reason I say the vast majority of people will apply through non-binding regular decision is because that's what's best for most people. I view binding programs as for specific self-selected populations of the prospective applicant pool. So for example, we have one binding program called early decision. That's a binding process where the admission may be a little, I don't want to say easier because it's kind of misconstrues it in a way, but it is a program where you might get a little bit of advantage in the admissions process because you're saying GW Law is my top choice. A scholarship is not my top consideration. And I'm conveying that GW is my top choice by applying through this binding process. And therefore, you may get some favorable consideration that if you'd applied through the regular process may not have been, a part of the review. On the other hand, there's also the binding process, the Presidential Merit Scholarship Program, where if you're admitted, you get an automatic full tuition scholarship. So, that process is actually going to be a bit more competitive, obviously, than the regular decision. So those binding processes really are for a self-selected pool of people. And if you think you fit in one of those categories, feel free to be in touch with us so that we can talk to you about that. But whether it's GW Law's binding process or any law school's binding process, make sure that you have read the information that's available to you on websites or on the application instructions themselves, because you don't want to apply to a binding process and then learn that maybe that wasn't the right fit for you, because that's not the right way to approach it. You've got to be a good baby lawyer and read, what these are about, because you're signing up to do something in a binding way. So you are under a contractual obligation when you sign a binding commitment form.
Absolutely. And I love that. You have to be a little baby lawyer before you get in and, do your research, know what you're getting yourself into. That's great. I would love to know how admissions views non-traditional students. So for example, I am now 6 years out of undergrad. I've, had a career and I've actually lived abroad for 5 years. So, students like that who have had a career, maybe even longer, does that look favorable, or is it kind of like a ding against them? Or, how does admissions look at students like that?
Sure. I've got to tell you, at GW Law, Ayaka, we actually don't use the term non-traditional that much. When we're sitting around the admissions office and having conversations with one another, that term never comes up. I think it's one of those terms that is really the focus of applicants. And I can understand why, because there are people who understand that they're not in the category of, applying when they're in college or just 1 or 2 years out. But for our applicant pool, we have such a big, diverse applicant pool at GW Law, in part because we're in a big professional city. And you have people from all over the country and the world who want to be a part of that professional life, who may have had professional lives of their own prior to starting law school. So for us, we like to see that age diversity in our applicant pool and in our incoming class. And the good news is when you're a first-year law student, everybody's in it together. It doesn't matter. I remember in my first year, section at GW Law, there were actually 2 people who were in their 40s. They had had careers, one in the military, one in a different career. They were 1Ls. And then there was also somebody who was, kind of the youngest person in the class. I think she was, less than 21. And so, but everybody was a 1L. Everybody was learning this stuff as a team and together. And so you would be surprised how those differences don't feel as sharp once you're in law school and learning this new material. But in terms of the review process, obviously, the people who are who've been out of school for a while and have had some professional experience are bringing something to the table that usually somebody who's coming directly from college is just not able to bring to the conversation about their potential for success in our community. But that said, to be honest, the review process is not that much different. When we're reviewing applications, we don't separate applications into different virtual stacks, so to speak. It's not like they're sorted by part-time or full-time or age or in any other way by gender. I mean, we get a list of applicants and we're just reviewing them one by one to see what they're bringing to the table on their own merit, because everybody has a different story and we want them to have taken advantage of whatever opportunities they happen to have had. And different people have different opportunities and different life paths. The one thing I will say is that for non-traditional students, the undergraduate background is still important. I know that's to the frustration of some older applicants, but the undergraduate record is still what the American Bar Association, which accredits law schools, says should be an important part of the admissions review process. And so it is, frankly, regardless of whether it was 10 years ago or 10 weeks ago.
Right.
That's just a fact of the admissions process for law school.
Absolutely. And I'm sure, the pandemic has changed a lot of things for people. And I've heard, there's this increase in the number of people who are applying to law school. For the people who have had careers, and might have seen a little bit of a gap in this year where, job security wasn't there. Is there, is that required for prospective students to address in an addenda about, a gap in their, in their resume, let's say, even maybe before the pandemic, any requirement there?
It's not a requirement. I really think that an addendum is a matter of judgment on the part of the applicant. Every element of an applicant's profile that they're bringing to us reflects their judgment. And whether or not a person needs to submit an addendum will be up to them. I think that the way that it should be considered is that if you have a reasonable belief that there will be a question mark in the mind of an application reviewer like myself or Dean Sim or my colleague Megan Spratt, like if there's something that you just think, gee, this is going to raise a question in the mind of the reader. It doesn't mean that the answer is going to be bad or good in our mind, but it just means that there's going to be some unanswered piece, like what was this person doing with this year, or why did they take this class, or slate of classes under an unusual grading system, those kinds of things. Then by all means, a brief, I'm going to say it a second time, brief, concise addendum that is very factual in nature, that's just setting forth what the situation was, could indeed be very helpful. Now, look, the one thing about COVID, we've all lived through it. Right. So you don't have to rely on explaining a very particular circumstance the way that somebody might if it really is specific to them. We all know what COVID is. It upended the world for 15 months, continues to do so to some degree. So we know what happened. We know that, if you took a slate of classes pass fail in the spring of 2020, you're going to get no judgment on the part of the admissions office, right? If you had an issue with employment, you're going to get no judgment. So don't worry about that part. We're going to be extending a lot of goodwill and flexibility, given that we know what the world's been through.
Right. That's amazing. And just a little bit more on addendas. I know there's a lot of forums out there and information out there about like you need to disclose everything, including parking tickets and all that. And there's other people who are like, we don't need to disclose that. And then there are people who say you need to explain low GPA. If you took the LSAT more than 5-6 times, you have to explain that. I know we talked about judgment here, but what is your opinion on that?
So those are two separate categories, I would say. The first that you were talking about is kind of a character and fitness slate of questions that every law school application is going to have. Now, I would read those questions carefully because every law school is going to ask their own questions in their own way. So the way that you answered for one law school or what you answered for one law school's application may not be universally applicable to the other schools. So be careful in that. Uh, you don't want to be insufficient in your disclosures, nor do you want to be taking that part of the application anything less than seriously.
Mhm.
So be careful about that. In terms of the second part of your question, whether you want to submit an addendum about grades or LSATs, um, you know, I think if you believe that the addendum is going to help elucidate some uh, experience that you had, or it's going to provide an explanation for some real hiccup in your academic or LSAT record, then by all means, you're welcome to submit an addendum. I just would be reasonable about it. You will learn in law school, or you will hear a phrase quite a bit called the reasonable person standard. Start applying it now when you're applying to law school. And that means, you know, if your LSAT went up or down by 2 points, do we need an addendum? No.
Mm.
We see plenty of LSAT addenda that frankly are unnecessary.
Sure.
And you're highlighting something in your application usually that's not the best part of your application, right? So do you
Mhm.
really want us to spend a lot of time reading about that unless it really is critical to us understanding the context
Right.
of your academic or testing history? Probably not.
Sure.
So just apply good judgment. If
Mhm.
you really had a rocky semester because you had a health issue, by all means, an addendum is a perfectly sufficient way to explain that. If there is some big jump one way or the other in the LSAT score, you probably do want to explain that, because schools are going to wonder, well, what was going on? Like,
Mhm.
why are these test scores so different?
Sure.
But if it's something less than that, I would refrain from doing it unless there's a good reason.
Got it. Great. And before we move on from applying, have you seen any big changes with the pandemic, post-pandemic, huge jump in applicants, or, anything like that?
Well, certainly for this year, I mean, anybody who's listening to this podcast probably has had some call to research, what this year, meaning for fall 2021, what the applicant pool has been like. And, GW Law, we've experienced a bump, I would say, of historic portions, meaning that it's not just the standard, oh, we were up, a few percent or down a few percent, which is kind of typical when you look across time. But this has been more of a substantial increase in applicants for this fall's entering class.
Mhm.
No doubt, because I'm assuming because there were some people who may have thought about taking a gap year but decided not to, because they didn't know what they might be doing with that year during a pandemic. So why not go ahead and apply to law school if they knew that was their eventual plan? And there may be some people who just found that, being in law school at this time, if they knew that was the right thing for them, why not go ahead and do it,
Mhm.
to get them headed toward the career that they wanted to have. There's sort of a level of certainty that a law school experience can provide in a very uncertain time.
Mhm.
What that means for future years, who knows? That is to be determined. It could be that next year's application volume across the country declines a bit from this year. That wouldn't be a surprise after a big peak, right? Because there could have been some people who are applying this year who, under non-pandemic circumstances, would have been applying next year anyway. So, but I don't have the answer to that, because I can't predict the future. If I could, that'd be great. But we don't know how it will affect the future. Certainly, there will be information about that people will be able to glean over the course of the next application cycle, but we don't know yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to move on to like the life at GW Law.
Sure.
What does it look like to be a student there? Um, what do students, what does the first year look like for students? I'm sure there's core classes, and you mentioned before, everyone's a 1L, and you're in it together. But what does that look like for a student at GW Law?
Our students get busy right away, in terms of student organizations and in terms of their involvement in life on campus. I really like that.
Mhm.
I know some students have come to me before and said, I've talked to some schools and they think that first year students really just need to be focused on academics and maybe hold off on the involvement in organizations to the second semester or second year. That's not how it is. Our 1Ls are busy right off the bat. They get involved in student governance, they get involved in student organizations, they get involved in the life of Washington, D.C., which they are now members of a city community, not just a law school community. They do take the core foundational courses that are not too different than what you would find across the country. There is a very sort of canonical approach among American law schools to that first year. There are a couple of things about our first year experience that I'm really proud of that I do think differentiates GW Law from other schools. One is our Inns of Court program. The Inns of Court is what we refer to as our first year sections. And through that program, you have a team of informal advisors who help shepherd you through that first year of law school. The team of informal advisors would include a faculty member, a dean of students or academic advisor, a member of the Career Center, a librarian, an upper level student. And it's just a good team of people to help you as you're trying to sort of figure out how, excuse me, how you want your law school career to unfold. What do you want your narrative to be? How do you want your law school experience to be coherent? You know, you show up at GW Law and you've got a mountain of elective courses, student organizations, internship opportunities. And what you need is a little bit of guidance in how to sort through all of that and what in this big buffet of options you want to pick from so you have some coherence to your ultimate, your ultimate experience. Because that's frankly what's going to help you professionally. And obviously law school is a professional school. It's there to help you do a lot of things, but principally it's there to kick you off into being in the profession of lawyering. So that's one piece of it. The second piece of it is our Fundamentals of Lawyering program. That is our version of legal research and writing. And it's a bit expanded. It deals with problem solving skills. It deals with client relationships. It was actually developed in consultation with law firm leaders, government lawyering leaders, who we actually asked. We queried them, like, what do you want if a first year student is coming to you in their summer after their first year, what skills do you want law students to have that you're not seeing, not just at GW, but broadly across all US law schools? And their consultation really helped us refine and expand that skills-based class that's so important for 1Ls.
Yeah, and I really love that description about the fundamentals. And I do encourage people who are listening to the YouTube or the podcast to check out the website. There's a whole page about it with some very interesting information. So I would really check that out in deep dive, because that's something where I'm like, that's a usable skill that, you're coming out of your first year with, and that's amazing to, have that support. So that's something that I'm like, yes, I want. And I know we talked about, there's this huge array of areas of study at the GW Law School. What are the most popular areas, and then what are some things that are very unique to what areas are unique to GW Law, or we might not find at all law schools out there?
Sure. The most popular areas of law are the big ones in terms of our elective curriculum. As much as I'm mentioning these student life type organizations, these activist organizations in the student body, the affinity groups, the student groups that are rooted in a particular area of law, the journals, the moot court opportunities, all of those are, outgrowths. They springboard from a very large elective curriculum. And the largest areas of that curriculum would include international law, which of course is a big umbrella that covers a lot of different areas. International human rights is very different, for example, than international business transactions. Other areas would include environmental law, anything related to public interest lawyering, anything related to the administrative state, so government lawyering, and business and finance is another very large track. there's a number of areas of law. National security is another big area, in part because you're in a particular location where you can combine national security with a couple of other areas. So you can do national security and U.S. foreign relations, but you can also do national security as it relates to cybersecurity, which we're all seeing is a very important issue. We've got some of the foremost cybersecurity and privacy law experts in the country who are on our faculty. There are numerous areas. I hate to mention any because I feel like that I'm leaving some out, but those are some big areas of law for us. Intellectual property is also a very big one. In terms of the uniqueness or the unique elements of the GW law experience, some of our clinics are just fantastic. The hearing students talk about their experience and the ways that they feel the law coming to life in their own hands as they're learning to be practitioners. It can be, I don't want to sound too sentimental, but I've seen students talk about those in a really life-changing way. And as well, the numerous opportunities to get engaged with internships, not just during the summer, but all throughout the academic year in your 2L and 3L years, really help students refine what it is that they want to do. I'm sure that there are students out there applying to law school that are hearing us talk, who have in mind exactly what they want to do in law school. And every year I talk to students that I had met when they were prospectives, who then get to law school and learn about whole new areas that they hadn't even thought about. Their mind is opened. Be prepared, because I would say be prepared to be a sponge, because when you get to law school at GW, you're going to wake up from your first 14 weeks, which is the length of your first, semester of classes, and look back, and you're not going to believe the amount of information and considerations and the thoughts that have gone through your head in that short amount of time. So I think that's important. But also too, Ayaka, the faculty, especially for being at a larger law school, the faculty is just first rate in terms of their teaching ability. They're obviously, renowned scholars. That goes without saying. To get on the faculty at a school like GW Law, you have to be a scholar of the first order. And that's important. But when you're a 1L, what's really important is that you're sitting in a room with a great teacher. And that, I think, is one of the hallmarks of the GW Law experience, is that the faculty really considers itself a teaching faculty. And I think, frankly, that's something that surprised me when I came to GW Law. And it's nice to see that it continues to this day.
Yeah, and that's so important. And I love that you emphasize that. That's, especially in your first year, you gotta absorb all the information. So yeah, absolutely. And I would love to double click into the clinics. I know there's research centers and initiatives. I'm very interested in cybersecurity. I have a little bit of a career there, so I'm like, I want to double click all of this, and I'm sure I'll follow up with you after the interview tonight. But how do students get involved in the clinics? Is it their second year, third year, or is that something that students can kind of dictate where they go? How is that done?
Well, there are certainly experiential opportunities in the first year. You could do work through our very large pro bono program. You can get involved, for example, we have a robust alternative dispute resolution competition for 1Ls. There are ways to sort of get that experiential learning that I think is so important to the law school experience at GW, and should be anywhere. Anywhere these prospective students that we're speaking with right now may want to attend law school. But the big experiential learning opportunities like clinics, moot court competitions, they do come when you're a 2L and a 3L, because frankly, you need a little bit of training, before you head into such endeavors. For the clinics, there is an application process, and I think usually, I was actually just talking to our fabulous dean of the clinics, Laurie Cohn, a couple of weeks ago about students getting into clinics. And Usually, I think most students are able to do the clinic of their choice, their top
Mm.
choice at some point during their time as a GW law student.
Great.
But what I would say is if you know you want to do a certain clinic, be laying the foundations for it early in your life as a law student. So let's say you want to do the immigration clinic. I'm just throwing that out there as one example. We have many clinics that do many different things and they're quite diverse. But let's say you want to do the immigration clinic. Well, you probably want to take immigration law, as an elective the first
Right.
semester when you're a 2L, right? You
Mhm.
might want to get involved in the Immigration Law Student Association when you're a 1L. You
Mm.
might want to be making some contact with the immigration clinic and their faculty, prior to your application process, so that you've demonstrated your interest. You've shown through the work that you've done and through your involvement in the legal life of our campus that you are really interested and committed to this. You're not just kind of showing up with an application that doesn't represent that. So, that's one way in which the Inns of Court program helps, because again, that program helps 1L sort of develop a sense of how they want to coherently approach all the options they have in law school.
Great. And I'm sorry, we're jumping back a little bit, but
Sure.
would it be okay for, let's say, prospective students to say, I'm super interested in this clinic or this research institute, and kind of specify an area of law in their application that they're interested in? Is that something that's, kind of okay to do or look down on, or what's the opinion there?
Yeah, it's certainly not looked down on, but it's also not a requirement. There are some people who apply to law school and they may just not know, and that's fine.
Sure.
As long as people have a good, solid reason for wanting to go to law school,
Mhm.
and they've done appropriate thinking about that, we're going to trust their judgment.
Yeah.
Um, unless there's some, reason to think otherwise. But certainly, if a student wants to talk about a particular strength of GW laws and why they think they can contribute to that, and in their application, they may certainly do so. What I would say is, you want to spend your application talking about yourself,
Mhm.
not us. We
Right.
already know what we offer as a law school. So reading a personal statement, for example, that reiterates what our clinics are and what our elective courses are or who our faculty is, doesn't tell us about the applicant. And that's what we want to get to know when we're reading about an application. So I would say the goal is connecting the applicant perhaps to something in our law school culture or
Yeah,
curriculum that they may be interested in, but we want to be hearing about you. We don't
absolutely.
want a recitation of our website. We know what's on our website.
Yeah,
So I think people understand what I'm saying, but the focus of ours is to get to know the applicant,
absolutely.
her or himself.
Absolutely. And then, last thing about life at GW Law, and there's so much more to talk about, but has the pandemic changed the classroom experience or any of these experiences like the clinics and research centers? I'm sure it went virtual at some point, and hopefully people are coming back to the classroom, but has that changed at all?
Well, yes. I mean, it changed it in the sense of the physical experience of our classes, because we indeed did go virtual. We are a larger law school situated in a busy urban area. And look, last fall of 2020, was it really possible to make that happen safely for our faculty and our students in person? No, let's be honest.
Mhm.
So we migrated to a virtual scenario. And I will say, I actually think some of our faculty did a great job of mining the best of virtual learning. They found ways to break students out into discussion groups in classes where in a in-person setting, they might not have been able to do that, or they might not have thought of that, option. So we did I think, our students had a positive year. And frankly, too, there were some things that surprised me. About midway through the year, I had an offhanded conversation just catching up, because we weren't in the hallways where we could catch
Right.
up. So we had an offhanded conversation with one of our directors in the field placement program. And I learned that we had more students in field placement than at any other time in GW Law's field placement history.
Mm,
And I was like, really? That was counter to my expectation.
right.
So I was really proud of our community for finding the best ways to deal with a difficult situation. But putting that behind us, the good news is that, we're making plans absent any unforeseen circumstances. We're making plans for a full return to campus this fall. Um,
Amazing.
and so students and faculty and me and my colleagues and all of us will be on campus ready to meet new students and ready to welcome our returning students to campus, and also ready to welcome prospective students. I would say, be on the lookout for any information on our admissions website. Because frankly, right now, I mean, we're in June, so I'm not sure if we're gonna have a full scale tour and class visit program as early as September when we normally would, but we'll see. But be looking at our website, because we will have ways for you to come visit, and we truly look forward to that. For those of us in admissions, Dean Sim and Megan and Ketty and Julian and Selena and me, meeting prospective students is our favorite part of our job. And I mention them by name because it's a great team and I want you to get to know us. I will say that there are some things, some ways to meet prospective students that we adopted during the past year that we're probably going to keep, because we had never thought of doing certain virtual things like a community spotlight series or interviews with members of our community that prospective students could enjoy, or ask me anything events.
Right.
We never thought about doing that. And so there were silver linings to this past year. And I suspect that we're going to keep doing those things. So again, pay attention to our website.
Will do. And, people have become more comfortable coming on online. So
Yes.
it's absolutely a silver lining. I do want to wrap this up. But one last question to you. What is you've highlighted so many great things, but what is your favorite thing about GW Law?
When it comes down to it, my answer to that question has always been the same. There are some obvious great things about GW Law, like where it is, what its course offerings are, the fantastic faculty. But at the end of the day, it's how the students treat each other. When I was in law school, all the way up through today, I've heard the same stories over and over again that, someone might miss class, perhaps for a personal reason, and 4 students in their class, maybe some of whom aren't even, close friends with the student, just email their notes and say, I saw you weren't in class. Here are my notes. If you need anything, let me know. That sounds like a small thing, but every law school culture is different. And it has been so great to hear prospective students visit over the years and say things like, gee, I visited 5 different law schools. And what's funny is I walked through the hallways here and I heard people laughing. Is that something that happens here? And my first thought is, are there places where people don't laugh? Like, of course people are laughing. Like that's a great experience of humanity, is that we come together and we have good moments with one another. But that's just a daily occurrence for people at GW Law. And the students really are supportive of one another. They make great friendships. And I think part of that is the busyness, and they're all there to do something different. So the sense of, competitiveness that, you may hear about, that law school may have, I would say, don't believe everything you hear. What you want to do, if you can, is visit. If you can't visit in person, there are other ways to get to know us. There are ways to talk to our students and get to understand what the law school experience is like. But when you come to a busy place where everybody's kind of there to perhaps do something different, they're not focused on, their peer as being a competitor. They're focused on their peer as being a collaborator or a collaborator. And so that has been a hallmark of the GW Law experience as I've seen it for a very long time. So my answer to your question wouldn't have been any different 10 years ago. I hope it's no different 10 years from now. But that's the thing that I really love about the place. So I hope people will come visit virtually or in person, and hope that they find the same thing.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. I am so interested, and I'm like ready to go into the website again. I'm probably going to reach out to you shortly.
Please
So
do. Please do.
Yeah, and thank you so much for your candid answers. I loved all of this. So thank you for sharing the information. For those of you who are listening, if you have further questions or you want to connect with admissions, please do reach out. This was such a friendly conversation. So thank you so much.
Well, it's great to see you, Ayaka. If you do have questions, let me know. And for anybody who is listening, it's easy to find us. Just go to our website. We're at admissions@law.gwu.edu. Easy to remember. And we'd love to hear from any of you. And we hope to see you soon.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.